another few weeks passed with no clue as to how she'd get home. No matter how much she prayed or begged, more so, Quinn was as unknowing as when she first arrived. Plus, she was growing bored. Conversation with Alodia, or some of the villagers who kept shops, was dulling her mood by the day. She needed out. Alodia, the sweet woman she was, must have read Quinn's thoughts, since when she glanced up from stitching Quinn's dress, which had ironically ripped from her rash decision to sword fight in it, said, "Perhaps you should explore the king's library, Lady Miller. It's always open to his guests." Leaping up and startling the poor old woman, Quinn could have hugged her, but decided against the unmannerly action. Knowing her way by now, Quinn left her room and headed for the library. She all but had to hold back from sprinting. She reached the grand room, and a beam lit up her expression. Eyes scanning the walls of books, her heart eagerly raced. Where would she start? Her mindless searching distracted her from the person walking by, and they crashed into each other, sending a heap of books to the ground with loud thuds. Quinn hastily apologized and bent to retrieve the books. Small hands grabbed the ones Quinn missed, and when Quinn stood, ready to apologize again and hand them over, she nearly returned them to its previous state. A small, brown-eyed woman stared back at her. Clad in a simple linen tunic, the almond-toned woman was even more beautiful in person. Sabrina Edmund, also known as the main character of the story and the future queen of Sognimia. Quinn resisted the urge to greet her as royalty, since it was clear King Henry hadn't asked for her hand in marriage yet. But that day would come soon enough. Quinn smiled as gently as she could, pushing her excitement aside. "My apologies. I didn't mean to knock your books over." For extra measure, she stuck her hand out. "I am Lady Miller." Her gesture rewarded her with an odd look. Quinn had nearly forgotten. Everyone was rude to Sabrina in this kingdom. They didn't deem her worthy to be the king's scribe. Not only because she was a woman, but because of the way she looked. Quinn hated them for it. Even if it set her apart as well, she was determined to treat Sabrina as she should have been treated since the beginning. Smile widening, she retracted her hand. "You must be Sabrina Edmund, the king's new scribe. I've heard great things about you." When Sabrina's eyes rounded, Quinn inwardly grimaced, hoping she didn't say too much. Her suspicion ceased when Sabrina gave her an unsure smile. "Do you think so?" Quinn had almost forgotten Sabrina had an accent as well, making her words slightly unintelligible, but she strained to hear it. She nodded vigorously. "Of course I do. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise," because many people would do just that, she refrained from saying. Hours had passed, and not only had Quinn acquired more than a few books to read and then return, she'd gained a friend. Sabrina left before Quinn, but not before she gave her a warm hug, thanking her for being kind to her. She opened up about her treatment from others, which was awfully sad, but Quinn encouraged her with a verse she often repeated to herself after a long and hectic day. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The scripture put Sabrina at ease as she left, promising to meet her in the library again the following day. Quinn could hardly wait to go to bed. But first, she had to have supper. As of late, she'd been having it in her room, asking Alodia if she could send it up via one of the servants in the kitchen. Alodia asked why she wouldn't have supper with the king, questioning whether she felt put off by his lack of family members present. But she hurriedly denied it. King Henry wasn't the problem. It was Captain Wenslate. After the incident in the garden, Quinn felt conflicted about many things, including the man in question. She wasn't sure how she felt about him, but they clearly shared that feeling for them almost to kiss. What that feeling was, she was unsure. So she'd isolated herself, giving excuse after excuse. But tonight, she'd run out of excuses. "Won't you join King Henry and Captain Wenslate for dinner, dear?" Alodia asked as she brushed her hair, preparing to pin it into a bun. Mouth dry from the anticipated question, she tried to find an excuse. "I have to read tonight." Alodia wasn't affected by her efforts. "Books can wait, Lady Miller. The king would greatly appreciate your company." I'm sure he gets tired of seeing only his captain's face every time he's to enjoy a meal. She had a point, and as long as King Henry was there, the atmosphere would remain neutral. Putting herself aside, she thought of the kind king. The least she could do was tolerate his moody captain for an hour or so. With a nod, she said, "I'll go." Dressed rather simply with her hair in a neat bun, Quinn entered the dining hall, momentarily confused as to why the guards weren't present today. Maybe they were running late. She shook the thought away and entered further, only faltering for a moment when she saw Captain Wensley sitting in his usual spot. The only problem was that he was the only one present. Her heart slammed against her chest, but she reminded herself to stay calm. Keeping a placid tone and unreadable expression, she asked, "Where is King Henry?" Green eyes met hers, and she froze, thrown off by the look within them. She glanced away as he answered. He was summoned elsewhere for an emergency meeting. There have been rumors of intruders looking to sabotage trading ships and infiltrate kingdoms. Her pulse quickened. She'd read about the rumors and knew them to be true. An attempt would be made on the king's life soon through a trade of weapons, ironically. Quinn was conflicted. If she told him, he'd grow suspicious and throw her in the dungeon. If she didn't, King Henry would get away with minor injuries since Captain Wenslet would save him. It made her wonder why he was here and not with King Henry at the meeting. As if reading her thoughts, he said, "He assigned me to patrol duty tonight. A few guards are to watch the borders for any signs of suspicion." Perhaps she was imagining it, but as he spoke, he didn't sound as gruff, almost softer, and his eyes were different, less guarded. She focused right as Captain Wensley gestured to the seat across from him. She took it, unsure of what she was doing here. She told herself she wouldn't allow them to be alone again, even if there were servants in the kitchen who could come in at any time. Pushing the thought aside, Quinn focused on nothing and everything at once. The silence was deafening, so tense she could hear the muffled conversation from the servants in the kitchen. Despite feeling Captain Wenslet's stare on her, Quinn kept her eyes glued to the wooden table. Sure, it was rude of her, but fear overpowered manners at the moment. But then, curiosity overpowered fear. Her eyes slowly rose to his, finding a rather warm expression on his face, an expression she never expected to see from him. Heart skipping several beats, she lost herself in the embrace of his eyes. Swirling irises of sea-green waves drew her so deep into their depths, she was afraid she'd never come back for air. The only thing that broke her from his spell was the voice of the servant announcing the beginning of the meal. Quinn hoped she didn't look as dazed as she felt. The meal continued in comfortable silence, but Quinn couldn't stop thinking about the way Captain Wensley had looked at her. She'd never been looked at like that before. Something deep within her chest ached, yearning for a look like that for the rest of her life. Quinn had grown up naively hoping for the love she read about in books, but the older she got, she realized that reality was only obtainable where it came from. Fictional works. You either found someone you tolerated, or you stayed single. It was what her parents had done, and she was following in their footsteps with Beck. Not that they'd ever spoken of marriage before. The meal was over before she could blink. She stood on shaky legs, preparing to wish Captain Wenslet good night before scurrying out of the dining hall, but his deep voice stopped her. "Lady Miller, if you have a few moments, I would like to show you something." There was a hint of hesitance in his voice that gave him an adorable air. Making sure not to turn so fast so she wouldn't seem desperate, she squared her shoulders. "What is it, Captain Wenslet?" His eyes sparkled in a way that left her breathless. "You'll have to see." Quinn wasn't sure where he was taking her, but she felt at ease. Not only because the sun was still up, but because she had an unspoken trust in the man leading her. She wasn't sure where it came from, but it was there, as evident as day. She nearly crashed into his back as he abruptly stopped after climbing a rather steep hill. Stepping to the side, he revealed a beautiful cherry tree, fully ripened. Gauging the awestruck expression Quinn wore, Captain Wenslet smiled. "The servants come to pick from them every month. Sometimes I like to sneak here and pray." and maybe eat a few cherries. With the mischievous glint in his eyes, Quinn could tell he had eaten more than a few. A laugh escaped her, one airy to her own ears. In truth, she did kind of feel light, carefree even. She hadn't felt that in a long time. It made her want to stay here forever. The thought was sobering. Could she stay here forever, leaving her previous life behind? Ever since she'd lost her grandma, life just wasn't the same anymore, but an escape this drastic. She wasn't sure. She sat beside Captain Wenslate beneath the shade of the cherry tree, watching as he reached up and plucked a handful of cherries off the leaves in a practiced move. He brought the handful to his face and sorted out the bad cherries, which left him with a decent amount. He turned to her, offering her a few. She gratefully took them and prayed over them before biting into one. The juice was tart and warm. Following Captain Wenslate's lead, she spat the pits into the grass. Nature filled the silence, but it didn't last long. I have to say, Lady Miller, I didn't trust you at first. Not at all, but now you are not the most repulsive. At his backhanded compliment, she glared at him and playfully pushed his shoulder before they fell into laughter. When they sobered, Quinn wiped a stray tear from her cheek. That's when she realized she had walked into a trap, a sticky one. Their smiles were gone, and something deeper traveled between them. Pulse jumping, Quinn watched another intense emotion pass Captain Wenslate's stoic face. Her heartbeat skyrocketed when a look glinted in his eyes, and he took her face in his large hand. Rough calluses massaged the gentle skin of her cheekbone and jaw, and she found herself leaning into his touch. Then all reasoning flew out the window. She leaned in as he did, and they met halfway. Their lips touched, and fireworks erupted inside her chest. The way he held her so gently, yet took the initiative, it was easy to get lost in the embrace. Never had Quinn been kissed like this before, but at the moment she couldn't recall any other kiss she'd had. When they pulled apart for air, Quinn kept her eyes closed for a lingering moment. Captain Wenslate wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his strong chest. She relaxed into him, breathing in the earthy smell he pleasantly carried. She refused to think of anything else but this moment, this perfect moment. As his fingers ran through her hair from the bun he loosened, Quinn felt her eyes droop. She hadn't realized she had dozed until she awoke to a darkened sky, crickets chirping beneath the moon, and fireflies lighting the grass. But the thing she recalled the quickest was Captain Wenslate's absence. A week later, Quinn hadn't seen Captain Wenslate at all. She'd heard by word of mouth that he was still patrolling the land, but a large part of her felt as though he was avoiding her. The thought dropped into her stomach heavily, but she figured it was for the best. If she were to find her way home, how could she possibly explain all of this to Beck? Sure, she would probably never go home again, but the if was louder than any other possibility. That realization was sobering enough to numb her hurt over not seeing Captain Wenslate after their kiss beneath the cherry tree. Quinn spent the rest of the week with Sabrina and King Henry. She spent countless hours in the library, finding new books to read at the beginning of each week. She also got into the habit of attending church with King Henry and other local nobles. She was gradually getting over Captain Wenslate as the weeks passed, but a part of her still ached at the thought of him. In the last week of the month, he returned. She heard it from Elodia, who absent-mindedly continued to ramble despite Quinn's frozen state. She tried to brush it off with a laugh, but inside she was trembling. What had she expected? For him to leave forever? Opting to avoid him altogether, Quinn ate in her room for the next few days. She kept her library visits short and avoided the garden during the day. She'd made it a routine to walk the garden right before the sun completely disappeared, deeming it the best time to avoid run-ins with anyone. Creatures called from within the garden's greenery, hidden from her eyes, but the sounds offered tranquility. Running her fingers over flowers that aligned her path to the pond, Quinn let her mind run. Gentle breezes urged her to give her worries to God, to cast each care she had onto him. Although God had been silent for the months Quinn spent in Sognimia, she could still feel his presence, and that brought her unexplainable peace. She was so captivated by her thoughts, she failed to see the form kneeling in front of the wooden bench situated in the impressively large garden. She must have been too loud since the figure startled and turned to her. Even in the dimming light, Quinn recognized those alluring green eyes. Her pulse stuttered as Captain Winslet prepared to say something to her, but she didn't wait around to hear what it might have been. Sprinting back into the castle, Quinn didn't slow until she reached her room and slammed the door behind her. Once safe, she allowed herself to recall the look of adoration on Captain Winslet's face. Her legs threatened to give out from under her, so she hastily changed her clothes and plopped into bed, willing herself to forget about the man she was undoubtedly falling for. The next day, Quinn was determined to leave her room only when necessary. Since Sabrina would be busy all day and she had more than enough books to read, she could have stayed in her room, but she didn't want to feel like she was trapped. So with a quick prayer sent heavenward, Quinn opted to visit the library again. The visit went well. The library was basically unoccupied, aside from a few servants dusting the grand bookcases and cleaning the large windows. Quinn was traveling the halls with no coherent thoughts when she heard someone call her name. She didn't have to turn to know who it was, so she settled on trying to run away. That only rewarded her with a chase that didn't last very long, considering her pursuer was a large captain. He took firm hold of her wrist, turning her toward him so fast she gasped. Scared to meet his eyes, she kept her focus on his boots. Captain Winslet blew out a frustrated breath. "Lady Miller, please look at me." When she ignored him, he gently lifted her chin, forcing her eyes to his. They were so intense, swimming with emotions she couldn't understand. Breath-catching, Quinn could only stare at him as he spoke. "I left you alone at the cherry tree," he started, a regretful look on his face. "I would have stayed, but my men needed me. There was an attack near the eastern border. I had to help, or else they would have died. I didn't have a choice." Was that why he thought she was upset? Well, technically she was, but another factor took the title of crucial. Quinn shook her head. "Captain Winslet, No." He shook his head, blonde curls moving with the action. His face shone with such vulnerability, any words she had practiced prior to had been forgotten. "Call me Christopher, Quinn." Her breath caught in her throat, and to further her struggle to breathe, he took her face in his large hands. He gazed deep into her eyes, challenging her to look away. In the back of her mind, she feared someone would see them. But now that she thought about it, the halls were deserted, eerily so. Before she could find another reason to break free, he captured her mouth in a passionate kiss. Quinn's mind instantly went blank, and she lost herself in the sweet embrace. She hated to admit it, but she missed him terribly. And what was worse, she loved him. When Captain Winslet broke the kiss, he kept his hands on her face, his face glowing with the love he felt for her. Quinn. Her name was a melody on his lips. He inhaled a deep breath, seeming as if he was about to say something dire. "Quinn, A gut-wrenching scream broke through their moment, and whatever he was about to say was forgotten. Worry plagued Quinn's mind as they rushed towards the woman's scream, but soon after, realization dawned on her. In the book, one day before the new month, there would be an assassination attempt on the king's life. As it was written, Captain Winslet was supposed to be there to defend the king in the close call attempt, but he wasn't there to protect King Henry, because she distracted him. Panic surging through her, she scurried alongside Captain Winslet, matching his hastened stride. Before she could stop herself, she said, "King Henry is in trouble." An assassin broke into the kingdom and targeted him. "We have to hurry." Her worry-laden words did nothing to diminish what she'd just said, and Captain Winslet faltered, casting her an undecipherable look. Too focused on getting to the king, Quinn missed it. Hearing two muffled voices behind the door to the king's study, Quinn hesitated, wary of what lay behind the door. Beside her, Captain Winslet burst through the door, sword drawn, and ready to fight. There were no sounds of battle, so Quinn peeked into the room and found Sabrina hovering over King Henry, a look of devastation on her face as she laid the king on her lap. Her eyes reluctantly moved from King Henry's face, momentarily acknowledged Quinn and Captain Winsley, before traveling to a spot on the floor near an open window. That's when Quinn noticed the unmoving body of a man in a black cloak, his identity concealed. He tried to kill the king with a dagger. I managed to get it from him, and Sabrina trailed off with wild eyes, tears building within them. One fell on her soft cheek as she whispered, "I didn't mean to kill him." Before Quinn or Captain Winslet could say anything, the king groaned, his blue eyes opening a weak fraction. He wasn't focused on anything else but Sabrina. Even from a distance, you could see the tenderness he felt for his scribe. With a brittle cough, the king said, "You saved me, and I owe you my life." He offered a weak smile that his scribe observed as if it would give her life. Quinn's heart swelled with joy for them. After Captain Wensley summoned a few guards to take the king to his room so he could be treated, he told Sabrina to go to the library until the body was disposed of. And she shakily nodded. Quinn went to follow her friend, but his voice stopped her. "Not you." The way his tone sounded was a stark difference from earlier. She paused in front of the door, unsure what had happened from when they'd kissed to now. She could have sworn he was going to profess his love for her. Turning to him, she was met with a distrustful look, one that made her heart drop. His soft and affectionate eyes were now hard to read, just as it had been when she first arrived. He didn't allow her to guess what had changed. How did you know the king was in trouble? And how did you know it was an assassination attempt? Heart pounding at her accidental slip-up, Quinn tried to answer, but his sharp tone stopped her. "And don't bother lying." The stoniness in his voice didn't go unnoticed, and Quinn knew he assumed the worst. Lifting cautious hands, she said, "Christopher, I can explain. It's not what you think." The use of his first name made his mask crack a little, but he restored it. "Then explain, Lady Miller, or I will have no choice but to have you delivered to the dungeon." His words punctured her chest, threatening to leave a hole where her heart was. She had to come clean, or she'd be thrown back into that dreadful dungeon. Although doubts screamed at her to stay silent, she didn't have much of a choice. With a steadying breath, she met his eyes. "I'm not from here." She paused, hoping for a crack in his composure, but he gave nothing. Her lips sealed shut when she needed them to open the most. All she could do was stare at him in hopes that he would believe her. Her hope was crushed when he looked away from her, head lowering for a split second. When he glanced up, all traces of any care he might have had for her were completely gone. His eyes were vacant, and his tone was guarded. "Then you leave me no choice." Quinn's eyes widened as Captain Winslet called for his guards to seize her. She begged and pleaded, but he wouldn't give ear. As they dragged her out, she heard him say, "I cannot risk the king's life a second time. It is my duty to protect him." She was carried to the dungeon despite her innocent pleas, and once the bars slammed closed on her a second time, Quinn knew she wouldn't get out unless by some miracle. The cell was cold and lonely. No one else resided down in the dungeon except one guard, who usually spent his time sleeping the day away. Quinn was fresh out of hope, so she opted to sit around with weak prayers of her escape. Heartbroken, she didn't even care if the escape was through death. It was evident that whatever she and Captain Winslet may have had was long gone as the days went by. By day 5 of being in the dungeon, Quinn figured that even God had forgotten about her. Utterly defeated, her prayers ceased, and she knew she'd die in that cell all alone. That was until 2 days later. Huddled against the stone wall of the dungeon seeking some kind of warmth, Quinn startled awake at the sound of 2 deep voices conversing. Keeping her eyes closed, she strained to pick up the conversation. The echoing words were muffled, making her efforts useless. As one voice faded into a retreat, Quinn sagged. But then a voice spoke. "I know you're not sleeping." Her eyes flew open, but she refused to acknowledge the owner. There was a sigh, and then some shuffling before the person spoke again. "I came to check on you." Anger swirled with hurt and betrayal in her chest, making his words of fondness sound monotone. Despite herself, Quinn asked, "Did King Henry send you?" "No." There wasn't a trace of hesitation. "I wanted to see you," Quinn scoffed. "Yeah, right. I mean it. I acted rashly and I wanted to apologize. You did not deserve to be thrown in here." She imagined he ran a hand through his hair. "Quinn, Don't." The word was fueled by anger and hurt, but most of all, fear. Now that she'd been in the dungeon for a week on Captain Wenslet's command, the idea of them being in love didn't sound as melodic as it originally had. "Unless you're here to notify me of my execution date, you may leave. I don't wish to speak with you." There was silence for so long she thought he had left, but knew he didn't. Captain Wenslet was as stubborn as he was handsome. "Did you know there would be an attempt on the king's life?" His voice was hoarse from what sounded like exhaustion, but there was a hint of hope as well. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Did you help plot it?" His tone hardened. "No." She heard him shift and dared herself to look. He stood before her prison, hands gripping the bars as he stared down at her. Even in the dim lighting, pain was evident in his eyes. But Quinn refused to pity him. "He put her in here." He continued his interrogation. "How did you know?" Quinn's chest tightened. She glanced at him before looking away. "You wouldn't believe me." "And why wouldn't I?" he persisted. His annoyance fueled her annoyance. "Quinn, either you stay in this prison for life, or you plead your innocence." "You won't believe me," she snapped. "You can at least try," he yelled. His voice bounced off the walls, carrying through the dungeon well after he'd stopped speaking. Silence engulfed them for a long moment. Quinn knew the truth would amount to nothing, that no one would believe such a ridiculous story. But the hopeful look in the eyes of the man she loved urged her to try, even if that meant living in the cell for the rest of her days. She started from the beginning of her day, before everything took place: school, work, the 2 stressful calls she had, and her short time before she fell asleep and woke up here in Sognimia. As she told her story, she didn't miss the expression on his face at the mention of Beck. She also didn't miss the disbelief he didn't bother hiding. "I told you you wouldn't believe me," Quinn concluded at the end of her tale. The captain rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her stare. After a moment, his gaze found hers. She wasn't sure what it portrayed. Then he asked, "If you could return to your world, would you?" The question held so much depth. It made Quinn's head spin. But she'd be lying if she said she hadn't pondered this question many times. In the end, she had her answer. "I wouldn't." Those 2 words held a promise Quinn knew she'd be able to keep. Standing, she approached the bars of her cell, where he stood with a slack jaw. Reaching through the bars, she sought the warmth of his touch. Keeping her gaze steady on his, she said, "I don't think I could leave Sognimia. Or you." That was all he needed to hear to unlock the cell and pull her into his arms. She relished his embrace, her heart soaring at the realization of her truthful words. They hugged for a few minutes before he pulled back a small fraction and admired her face. Cupping her face in his hands, he said, "I love you, Quinn." Beaming, Quinn smiled up at Captain Wenslet. "I love you, Christopher." He captured her mouth with his, equally overjoyed. As they held one another, Quinn couldn't stop thanking God for the outcome of her story. As Quinn returned to her room after freshening up and joining the king and the captain for their meal, she plopped into her bed with a wide smile, not only at her decision to join them, but at what had taken place before she came into her room. Captain Wenslet had escorted her upstairs, after asking rather incessantly, and grinned at her at every chance he had. Quinn wasn't able to ask what had him so happy since he got straight to the point and asked for her hand in marriage. Shock was an understatement, considering Quinn was only 21 years old. But she knew what her answer would be. Now she and Captain Wenslet would be wed in just mere months. The thought was sobering and exciting all in one. Yawning, Quinn snuggled into her bed, excited for what the next day held for her. She looked forward to seeing her future husband and her friends, and sharing the news with everyone around. She couldn't wait to wake up. But when she did, it wasn't how she expected. Cool air blew on the back of her neck, making her shiver. Figuring it was her imagination, she tried to go back to sleep, but the hard surface beneath her arms and face prevented her from doing so. She squeezed her eyes shut, permitting herself to count this as a dream, but the truth was very clear. The distant sound of an alarm clock made her reality even more sobering. Quinn was back home, in Washington,